I think we're ready to make a start. We're recording. Shemai a croeso, dwi'n gweithio a Canolfan Gwasanaethau Cyhoeddus Digidol. Hello and welcome. I'm Edwina and I head up the communications team at the Centre for Digital Public Services. It's fantastic to have so many people join us today, and I'm looking forward to facilitating a great panel discussion on digital sustainability. If you don't know who we are, we at CDPS have been set up to help organisations in Wales design and improve digital public services. We're funded by Welsh Government, and along with the Chief Digital Officer in Local Government, Health and Care and Welsh Government, we're here to deliver Mission 1 of the Digital Strategy for Wales, which is digital services. We're delighted to host this event to coincide with Wales Climate Week. It's a week of virtual events dedicated to the exploration of the theme of fairness in the context of climate change. We're tackling and building greater resilience to climate change must be driven by the guiding principles of leaving no one behind. And there are lots of similarities with this team and design and digital public services. We're using the hashtag Wales Climate Week 2023, or yn Gymraeg, hashtag wythnos hinsawdd 2023. So a little bit of background on our event this afternoon. We did some research last year with Parago and MSpark based in Ynys to understand how digital in the public sector can contribute to Wales's net zero commitments. So why is this important? Well, public funded bodies in Wales come under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. A number of wellbeing goals are linked to sustainability, such as a prosperous Wales and a globally responsible Wales. The Act also puts in place a sustainable development principle, which means that we must act in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In terms of our net zero commitments, Welsh Government have set a collective ambition for the Welsh public sector to achieve net zero carbon by 2030. They've published a route map and a reporting guide, and considering we're rapidly approaching 2024, the target of 2030 doesn't seem that far away, and it will be here before you know it. So anything we can do to contribute to net zero is going to be a welcome step forward. So on the next slide, you're going to see some recommendations from the research that we did with Parago and with MSpark. The research highlighted a few things, but mainly that this is seen as a societal problem and not necessarily a problem for individuals, so there's no real user need. We don't have people banging on our door looking for support with this, but there is a real organisational and societal need to do something about it. So what we want to do as part of this event series is focus on the first two recommendations, and they are raising awareness of the role of digital in sustainability. Why do we want to do that? Well, people felt there was a lack of awareness and understanding of organisational net zero goals in general, but also the role of digital in making net zero a priority within digital. And then the second one, as I said, is around making net zero a priority within digital. There seems to be a real disconnect where people feel that sustainability is prioritised at the top of the organisation, but it rarely filters down to digital teams' objectives and priorities. So today's session is a bit of an experiment, actually. We want to really gauge the interest in this topic and to identify a bit of a user group for this work. We're glad to say there is interest in it. We've had over 110 people sign up for the event, and a number of you have filled in our pre-event survey. So thank you very much for doing that. Let's take a quick look at the results now. So one of the questions we asked was, how important is sustainability and reducing carbon emissions to you? And you can see there 5.5 was the average. So that's great. And then the second question we asked was, how effective do you believe you are in making work decisions that reduce carbon emissions? And you can see there that the average score was 2.9. So the will is definitely there, and the appetite is there, but not necessarily the confidence or the know-how to put some of this into practice. So the second part of the experiment today really is to gather from you information on where you think we can support you to add the most value. This topic is absolutely huge. There's lots of different parts to it. So we're looking to you to give us a steer on what support you might need. And to help your thinking, we've convened an expert panel to discuss what digital sustainability means to them. Why should you care? And what excites them about the opportunity of marrying digital with sustainability and exploring both together? At the end of the session, we'll share a survey with you and we'd love you to complete it. The link will be posted in the chat later, but as I said, that will really help us focus in on the support that we provide you post this event series. Okay, so let's get the ball rolling and let me introduce you to our amazing panel, which we've convened. We've got Hannah Smith, who's the Director of Operations at the Green Web Foundation. She's also co-founder of Green Tech Southwest. And if you're not familiar with the Green Web Foundation, it's an independent non-profit that tracks how much of the internet runs on green energy. We've got Ned Gartside. Ned is a service designer in the UK Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA. And alongside his day job, designing a new digital waste tracking service, he leads work to develop a set of principles to help teams towards the goal of designing and delivering low carbon services. We've got Dr. Hushneara Begum, who's the director at the Centre for Sustainability and a subject matter expert in sustainable procurement and supply chain management with a focus on low carbon. And Dr. Hush is also on CDPS's advisory panel as well. And then our final panel member this afternoon is Marketa Benisek. She is the Digital Sustainability Lead at Wholegrain Digital, and with a background in marketing, Marketa has a deep interest in storytelling for positive impact and is passionate about climate activism, having trained with Al Gore to become a climate reality leader. Sounds very exciting, Marketa. Each panel member will have up to 5 minutes to outline their position based on a couple of questions that we've proposed to them, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So please do pop your questions in the chat at any time as we go through the panel opening statements. And I can just would like to say that there is no such thing as a stupid question. So please don't feel that any question you pose is a silly question. I'll have plenty of them, I can guarantee you that. So on the slide here, you can see, what does digital sustainability mean to you? Why does it matter? And what excites you about digital sustainability? And the first panel member we're going to hand to is Hannah. So Hannah, over to you.
Great, thanks everyone. So what does digital sustainability mean to me? Well, to unpick that question, I would start off with thinking about what sustainability is in general. Sustainability to me is broader than just carbon emissions and consists of 3 strands, interconnected, interwoven strands. Some people call them pillars. I like to think of them as strands in like a hair plait. You've got 3 of them. You've got the social considerations, the environmental considerations, and the economic considerations as well. But for the sake of keeping my 5-minute pitch short and accessible, I'm going to focus on the environmental strand and talk about resources, in particular energy and carbon. Digital is a physical resource. It is a physical entity. It doesn't float around harmlessly in the clouds. It is very much present on our planet. At the Green Web Foundation, we talk about the internet being the largest coal-powered machine. And when you hear it like that, it does make you think a little differently. But the thing is that we don't always see or recognize this resource use in our day-to-day lives. And it matters because resources have to come from somewhere. And often they come from marginalized places that are already being exploited. We also have a finite amount of resources that we have to work with. You're probably all very aware, especially with COP happening at the moment, that we've got a really big job on our hands to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees C. And every sector has to play its part, and that includes the digital technology sector as well. The current emissions from computing are around 2% of the world total, but are projected to rise super steeply over the next 2 decades. By 2040, emissions from computing alone will be more than half the emissions level acceptable to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. So currently, we think IT will take more than half of the world's carbon budget in 2040. Mind-blowing. Blows my mind anyway. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about why. We've got some really good things happening as a result of the digitization transformation agenda. And I wanted to pick into a couple of things there because they do really relate to digital sustainability. First up, digital access is viewed as a fundamental right and something we should all have access to. And yes, I'm here for that. I think that's absolutely fantastic. That is a really, really important part of it. But we do have to ask ourselves the question, how much internet is enough, particularly in richer countries such as the UK, where we've already got a certain level of access to the internet? Like, how much do we actually need? Because there's the resource implication. The other thing around the digital transformation agenda is that there is a perceived potential for efficiency and sustainability gains in other sectors. So the idea is that if we digitize things in the farming or transport section, we can actually help reduce their carbon emissions by making them more efficient. There's a slight snag to this, which is something called Jevons paradox or the rebound effect. And this is a theory that says that actually when you make something more efficient, you don't actually reduce the amount of resources that are being consumed by that thing. What you do is you make it easier for people to do more of it. So you don't actually have a net decrease. So that's something we have to be mindful in the realm of digital sustainability. And the other thing I wanted to pick up with regards to digital sustainability and the transformation agenda, the digital transformation agenda, is this notion of techno-solutionism. Now, I know that that's a big word, but it essentially means that everybody thinks that if we make things, if we can solve every problem through digitizing it or applying some technical know-how. I'll give you a good example of that. AI. AI consumes huge amounts of resources. ChatGPT, for example, is estimated to use 60 times more energy than a Google search. So we've got some really big questions to answer here. In the last part, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the aspects of this that I'm excited about. So I've talked a lot about the problems, but there are some really good solutions available and good areas of research and work here. So for me, the question that excites me the most, and the key question I keep in my mind, is tech's overall use of electricity actually reducing at an individual organizational level? And when you stick it all together and look at it at national and international levels, is that reducing? And the key to that is measurement. And I think we're going to talk about that quite a lot today. We can't manage what you have to, let me try that again. You can't manage what you can't measure. I'm sure you've heard that all before. And at the Green Web Foundation, the thing that we work on particularly is measuring the energy usage from data centers and vendors as well. And that really, really excites me. And overall, to finish up, because I know Ed's about to kick me off, figuring out where digitization actually adds value and where it is critical, where we must have more of it and where we need less. And I think that's a really key question in the realm of digital sustainability. Thanks.
Fantastic, and gold star for timekeeping as well, Hannah. Thank you so much. Lots to unpick there, and I loved your phrase, you can't manage what you can't measure. We've had a lot of questions through already as part of the pre-event work that we did, and a big theme about measurement is coming through, so no doubt we will unpick that a little bit later as well. So diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you so much, Hannah. Okay, next up is Ned Gartside. So Ned, your 5 minutes starts now. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, my response to those questions is actually quite similar in some ways to Hannah, so I'll try not drag it out any longer than I need to, try and get through it pretty quick. So what does digital sustainability mean to me? Well, I work on the design of services in the public sector that are at least partially digital, and sometimes they're mostly digital. And to me, digital sustainability kind of encapsulates our need to think about the longer term impacts of those digital bits of products and services. And as a designer, actually, I think like the imperative from that is that we need to shift from our kind of what has been the dominant design paradigm for quite a long time, really, which is one where we, for the most part, we start by considering user needs, and then we have a look at organizational goals and technical feasibility, and we try and design something that sort of sits in the sweet spot between those three kind of lenses, if you like. And while those things are really important, and I don't think we should jettison them in any way, I think it's clear we also need to start really at the design level, considering the environmental, societal, economic, and perhaps even political impacts of what we design over the longer term. And we need to design for a right balance between all of those things. Otherwise, we're just not going to have sustainable products or services, whether they're digital or otherwise. And in order to do that, in order to be able to design, well, particularly for environmental impacts, I think, as has been mentioned already, measurement is absolutely key, like holistic measurement, including not just online impacts, the impacts of websites or servers and all that kind of stuff, but also offline. So what people might be doing in order to support the delivery of services, or if they're the user, then accessing those services. And I think as well as measurement, we also need a sort of set of principles, if you like, or standards, which can highlight to all of us what good practice looks like and which we can be kind of assessed against ultimately. Why does it matter? Well, again, Hannah's kind of touched on this, but digital or the internet has its own quite significant carbon footprint. But it does, we are told, have the potential to significantly reduce the carbon footprint of many other sectors through its ability to substitute a physical thing for a digital equivalent, or to find efficiencies and optimize existing processes. And perhaps it can even help us as citizens transition towards more sustainable patterns of consumption by helping connect us all, and so that we can learn about low impact lifestyles and that sort of thing. But there is a danger that we go the other way. So that digital actually enables and embeds unsustainable patterns of consumption, that we surround ourselves with more and more smart sensors capturing more and more data, and we're asking computers to do more and more processing on our behalf, which will use up more electricity, potentially carbon, probably carbon if we're using electricity, but also then we're requiring, again, as Hannah touched on, more manufacture and distribution of physical things. And there are all sorts of environmental impacts there beyond carbon, around water use, ozone depletion, ecosystem toxicity, resource depletion, deforestation, biodiversity loss. So there's a whole spectrum of things there we need to be aware of. So I think we need to be really vigilant about that. But what excites me about digital sustainability, I suppose, is that it seems that we're at a bit of a moment where there are some choices that lay ahead of us. And if we get it right, then perhaps it can be win-win. So the internet or our digital sort of worlds, if you like, of the future can be good from an environmental sustainability perspective, but maybe also at the same time we can boost general usability, accessibility, equality and inclusivity, resilience and cost. So we could end up hopefully with a leaner, greener, fairer internet, and maybe societies at large as well. And that's me.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ned. And you talked about a set of principles to almost, benchmark and hold ourselves accountable to. So we'll pick that up later on when we come on to questions as well, interested in the work you're doing at DEFRA around your the principles that you're designing. So thank you very much. Our third speaker then, if we can spotlight her, is Dr. Hushneara Begum. Your 5 minutes starts now, Hush.
Okay, so I see digital sustainability to be the emergence of two concepts coming together. So we've got digital in terms of connecting data, knowledge, services via the internet, but that would not be possible without products. And I think that's where I want to come in, products and services. So in terms of sustainability, we're trying to balance the economic side, the social side, and the environmental side of products and services that we're buying in to support digital. Without sustainability, digital is a risk. With sustainability is an opportunity to do things differently. So when we're talking about doing things differently, we're looking at making more use out of the products and services we have, looking at materials that go into it, the packaging. We're also looking at building up a future for not just for us, for future generations, contributing to a pathway for a low carbon economy, one that's fit for the future, contributes to low carbon targets, sustainability targets internationally, and also local targets in terms of net zero. What excites me about this is the opportunity to do things differently. Where we want to be in the future is not dictated by our past. It's an opportunity to draw a line to where we are and say, actually, where we need to move ahead needs to be reviewed now, and we need to take a different pathway. It's a coming together of communities, the environment and society that we live in to say, actually, our products and services need to also deliver. So within this space, it's an opportunity to make sure our suppliers are producing products that meet our demands in terms of greener suppliers, ones that also support the local economy. And in terms of that might be you, for example, reassessing next time you go and buy a laptop, not rushing in to say, let's buy what we bought last year. It's the case of doing things differently and actually seeing, let's take a stock take of where we are. let's do things differently. What are my core goal of that laptop? And what are the things I can negotiate and work with my buying team to do things differently? That will probably lead us to more greener suppliers that have accreditations, for example, ISO 14001, that contribute to the environmental management through their products. That probably also mean policies coming through in terms of organizations. That would mean we start looking at products, just not at the point when we buy in terms of price, but the whole life cycle, from the cradle to the grave or the revival, making sure these materials are kept in use for as long as possible, which we refer to as circular economy. Once we have produced that item, it's not the end of the world for them. They have a chance to be repaired, reused, remanufactured. And until that, we are not where we need to be. So it's sustainable with digital is an opportunity for all to come together.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And we'll touch on procurement, I'm sure, a little bit later, including not just the procurement of kind of hardware and software, but procurement in general, because that does account for a large proportion of organizations' total carbon footprint. And it would be useful to touch on collective procurement and the opportunities that that might bring from a sustainability point of view as well. So thank you very much for that. And you're all keeping to time. Very lovely. So I can only say thank you very much for that. Okay, please start putting your questions into the chat now. We've got one final speaker and then we'll be opening it up to the floor. Our final speaker then is Marketa. So Marketa, over to you, please.
Thank you. So what does digital sustainability mean to me? For me, digital sustainability is all about collaboratively shaping a web in a way that benefits both people and the planet. I strongly believe that each of us has the responsibility for how we design the world around us, because everything around us is designed. And in the digital world, the design of products and services can have a very far-reaching impact. So digital sustainability is about more than just energy efficiency and reduced carbon emissions. It is also about improving performance, accessibility, and user-friendliness, and therefore making the web even more equal and inclusive. Why does this matter? When we view digital projects through the lens of digital sustainability, we have the collective ability to design a web that is powered by renewable energy, a web that is efficient and mindful of how many resources are used. It is ethical and respectful towards users and their privacy, and considerate of people's health and well-being, and also the planet's well-being. Also, an often overlooked aspect of digital sustainability is accessibility, which is a crucial element that needs a shift in perception, in my opinion, within digital projects. In my experience, accessibility is often perceived as an optional add-on rather than an essential component of digital products or projects. But accessibility has 3 different layers, each of which carries significant implications for organizations. The first layer is the most apparent one, designing digital products for people with disabilities. According to the World Bank, 1 in 7 people live with disabilities, yet the web is not consistently designed to facilitate their easy access to and interaction with online content. So by enhancing website accessibility, organizations can broaden their audiences and even improve their brand perception. The second layer is accessibility from the perspective of individuals with less than optimal internet connection. When we design digital content with sustainability in mind, we will also make it more accessible to people with poor internet connection or those accessing content in areas where data is very expensive. Therefore, sustainable web design can have a profound impact in places where people can benefit from online content and applying the gained knowledge in their communities. So to put this into perspective, the Worldwide Broadband Speed League published a report in 2020 where they stated that downloading a 5 gigabyte movie in Liechtenstein takes less than 3 minutes, while in South Sudan it would take about 19.5 hours. So this puts the broadband speed in Liechtenstein 394 times faster than the one in South Sudan, and this makes the web very unequal. So crafting minimal, fast-loading content makes it accessible to people in areas where data is expensive and internet connections are limited. And the same principle applies in other places where internet connection is not great, such as the challenge I believe we've all faced trying to download any content while traveling on a train. Therefore, making digital products sustainable and accessible becomes an important investment for any organization. And the third layer relates to search engines, because screen readers used by people with disabilities are very similar to site crawlers used by search engines. Therefore, making sites accessible can also improve search rankings. And what excites me about digital sustainability is the opportunity to be more creative. Anyone working on a digital project can approach it with a sustainability mindset and ask, what is the most sustainable way to do this, whatever it is that they are working on. This opens so many doors to create innovative solutions that can have a really significant impact. And we can apply the innovative mindset to anything and everything. I've seen our developers and designers come up with beautiful and innovative solutions on different projects where clients have different needs. And there's always a way to go back to the original question, like, what is the most sustainable way to do this, to design this, to develop this? And I think that's really important, that we have this sustainability mindset and that we go into every single project with this mindset first.
Find the mute button. Thank you very much, Marketa. Some fascinating insights there around accessibility and inclusion, and really important if you think of the theme of fairness with Wales Climate Week. So definitely one that we can unpick and consider further as a panel. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions from the floor on that topic as well. Okay, let's bring the whole panel back then. So lots of really good insights there, some similar themes and topics, but some differentiation as well there in terms of what excites people and what the opportunities are, but also what digital sustainability means to them. So I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. And while people are gathering their thoughts together and putting some questions in the chat, I shall kick us off, if that's okay. We've got, as I said, a number of questions through from the pre-event work that we did. So let's start with one of those. Ned, I'm going to pick on you first of all, because you mentioned the importance of design. And we've got a question in to say, is anyone measuring the impact of unnecessary content or bad design that is made in policy that affects how effective the service is run and therefore the impact on carbon footprint? What would you say? Are you doing anything around that in DEFRA? Or yeah, what is the impact of bad design on digital sustainability?
Yeah, well, good question. Thank you. Well, the impact can be pretty big. I would say there is some work in government being done on this, but it's being mostly led by the Department for Work and Pensions. So yeah, there's some fantastic work on kind of specifically looking at measurement, and ultimately I think the goal is to try and come up with a metric for carbon footprint per average user interaction with a service. And I think the idea is that we might, in some ways seems a bit basic, but it would allow us to then at least start to be comparing one service to another. And in some ways, one service might be quite different to another, but actually a lot of the services in government are broadly similar in many ways. So that's a kind of North Star that's being aimed for. Yeah, and in the meantime, that work on measurement, it does involve chasing suppliers to some extent. So, you know, providers of cloud hosting, for example, or providers of laptops, say to government departments, because, you know, I think the aspiration is a very holistic measurement of service carbon footprint, including the stuff the user does online and offline, but also including the impact of staff who support the delivery of that service. So yeah, the aspiration is to include all aspects, and also the kind of in-use and embodied impacts of a service. That being the in-use being when the service is up and running, and the embodied being all those impacts that come from the kind of mining of raw materials and manufacture and distribution of all the physical devices that make up the system, the infrastructure that supports the delivery of that service. But I would also say that work is sort of in it's relatively early days. There was actually a really cool workshop last week that DWP hosted where which I was lucky enough to attend, but they had us looking at an existing service that DWP have, and seeing in groups whether we could redesign it so that there were better outcomes for human beings, internal and external, so better outcomes for the citizens using it, better outcomes for the staff supporting it, but also better outcomes for the planet. And so some of what we were looking at was actually stuff like all the emails that were going around internally in this kind of as is at DWP, and all these spreadsheets that were being shared, which is kind of was the method by which staff at DWP were making certain key decisions. So we were considering all the impacts of that, but it didn't specifically look at content, coming back to the question in that particular case, but I mean, it could do and it should do. We only had a few hours to do it, but if we were to continue that exercise on, yeah, we would want to look at content for that existing service, yeah, as well as everything else. Sorry, that's probably enough.
The bigger picture, isn't it? Thank you very much, Ned. Marketa, would you like to add anything to that in terms of the impact of poor design on sustainability, touching on content as well?
Yeah, I can definitely speak from the website's perspective, and poor design really leads to bad user experience, and bad user experience leads to wasted time online, really, because if people can't find what they were looking for, then that page view is ultimately wasted. So good design actually leads to just better user experience, which can lead to better even conversion rates, better engagement rates. So it's really important, even for businesses, to actually take this really seriously and design things in a better way, and just in a way that is that just there's reduced kind of clutter and noise. I think that we should really simplify user experience and user interface to just create more calm experiences online.
Lovely. Thank you. There's some questions coming through now, but there's also some really good links to blog posts and work that's been done by attendees as well. So this is all part of this event in terms of sharing good practice and learning as well. Hannah, can I come to you? Because one of the things you said was around the rebound effect and the perceived efficiency by digitising, and that actually sometimes there isn't that net decrease. What can organisations do in the planning stages to mitigate this? And what things do they need to be thinking about to make sure that there isn't that knock-on impact, and that there is actually a net reduction? What would you say organisations could do?
Great question. So I think it's about setting yourself a target to work to. Some organizations talk about, I mean, if we just put that into the context of websites, some organizations might talk about actually having a carbon budget for websites. So they might say, actually, on a page, we don't want this page to take more than a megabyte, or, I mean, that would be quite big, 0.5 megabyte, say, to load. And then setting yourself those budgets and working back from that can be a really, really interesting way of doing things, because then you're setting yourself a very clear target to work to and reduce from. I think so having a look at that, thinking about the big picture of things as well, and that's tricky. And I think Ned mentioned that too, talking about this sort of the whole scope of things, sort of thinking all the way end to end. So thinking, if you're measuring something in order to have those targets, thinking about the scope as well of how far up the supply chain and how far downstream you want to measure things and consider things there. And look, the other thing I'd say is don't get hung up on perfect answers to all of these questions. This stuff is tricky, so do your best. If you think that actually you can manage your scope from here to here, but you know that here is tricky, then that's fine. Do that part. And that's a practical way to go ahead and do things. Do that part, but be really super transparent and super clear that that is what you're measuring and that part is what you're managing. I think those are some quite important points to work to. Ed, you're on mute. I don't know if you know that. Yeah.
I'm working across two screens and trying to find the mute button. Really good advice. Thank you, Hannah. And I think that advice of breaking it down is really important because it is such, as I said, a big topic area and can be really quite daunting to break it down, set those targets and then know, what what you want to achieve. And then it's easier to measure them once you know what you want to achieve, isn't it? So thank you very much for that. We've had a couple of questions in, so I'll go straight to the floor and I'll come back to the ones that I have up my sleeve in a couple of minutes' time. So there's one in here from Claire, and she wants some very practical advice. What's the one easy thing that I can do right now to be greener in a digital sense? So who'd like to take that? I'm sure most of you will have something to say on this. And I think this is the thing, people want the practical advice as well. So who'd like to go first? Lovely, Hannah, come in.
I'm happy to go first. So one thing you could do. So at the Green Web Foundation, we have a whole bunch of tools and resources to help people figure out if their hosting is powered by green energy or not. So if there was one thing I would say you could do, you could hop onto our website. We have a tool called the Green Web Check or Green Web Checker. You can put any URL into that, and then it will tell you whether we know if that website is hosted green or not. So if we have the evidence to tell you that website is hosted green, we will let you know. If you find, oh dear, your hosting company is a little bit of a letdown, not hosted green, then we have a directory that can help you find alternatives for hosting. So that would be my advice. Find out if your hosting company is powered by green energy or not. And if they're not, switch.
Lovely, good advice. And I think a follow-up question, not for you to answer now, but for you to mull over, is if your website is powered by green, does that mean you can take the foot off the gas? That's not a very good analogy, a little bit, and not worry so much because it's powered by green and therefore you're doing your bit. Is that enough? Something for the panel to mull over. Who else would like to come in on Claire's really good question there about the practicalities of one thing that they can do right now? Hush.
Okay, I think I'll take that from the product perspective. I think this tendency when we look at digital, people are very quick to rush in and buy. So where I think within an organization, when it comes to the concept of digital, try to see what is possible to be done with what you have. Question if you need to buy in the first place. And if you're going to buy, revisit how you bought in the past and draw a line. It doesn't have to be like that. And going forward, I think I've seen too often in higher education, local authorities, people coming and rushing in saying, I want a laptop, I wanted it yesterday. It has to be this HP one. HP one has to be in silver because I like that. And they rushed in so late and they've sort of decided what they want. So the buying activity is more transactional. The elaboration of sustainability is hard to get in that point. If you plan it early, if you have to go buy, you visit the whole situation, it gives the buying team a chance to go buy more sustainably, factor in things like the plastic side, the packaging, potentially looking at digital. A big part of it I see as warranties. Often when we buy that product, we want to keep it in use as much as possible. So not just looking at pure price. I think historically in the public sector, what I saw is a case of buy it at a certain price. We're looking at budgets today. We're not looking at the long-term impact, but really we need to start opening up the budget conversation, saying actually the budget for today has to factor in future warranty as well. And these are the kind of things we need to look at, because when something falls apart or needs another check or clean or repair, that's another opportunity to keep it back in use.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Hutch. And I suppose we'll come on to it a little bit later. The flip side of that is the conversation around legacy tech as well. So we'll come on to that. We've got a question here from Graham, and Graham wants to know, has anyone any thoughts on the consideration, on the considerable issue of data storage and what big tech companies are doing about this, specifically thinking of cloud storage and the money companies make from running vast arrays of servers at huge cost? Who'd like to come in on that?
I'm happy to come on to it because it relates to sort of data centers, which is probably my wheelhouse a little bit, but I also don't want to dominate the
I will have a question for Marketa and Ned coming up very shortly. So if you want to take this one, that would be great.
Great. Thanks, Ed. It's a really interesting question. I'm fascinated by the impacts of cloud storage. You know, in the intro pitch, I said I talked about we don't see these impacts of these resources that are being used on a day-to-day. And I think cloud is a really, really, we can point our fingers to that and say, you know, cloud came along with a promise to make life easier for us when it came to tech. We'll just handle it all, take it off your plate and take it away. And they've kind of done that with these massive downsides. If you were running your own organization as servers, people call it on-premise stands for. If you were running your own on-prem servers, you would be so much more aware of the procurement effort you were having to keep the hardware running. You'd have so much more awareness of the energy that was being used there. We just don't get that from cloud. And I think there's a little bit of a dark pattern with cloud storage. I think that they do hook you in by making you think things are cheap and free and then sort of sneakily change things. So I think it's a really interesting one to watch for. I think that it is on us to be mindful about what we're storing and why. I know Marketa at Wholegrain led on a really cool project around digital waste and sort of looking at, Marketa, what was the toolkit called? Your digital detox? No, was it?
Digital declutter toolkit.
That's
Yeah.
it. Thanks. I thought that toolkit was absolutely awesome because it did really put the emphasis on us as users being very mindful of that waste and or of what we were storing physically. Actually, on a gigabyte per gigabyte level, it's actually not that much energy to store something in a cloud. It is actually a very small amount. We're talking grams of CO2. But when you've got terabytes or, you know, even more terabytes, huge amounts of data, that then starts to add up, especially when it sits there year on year on year as well. So the individual cost of storing something on cloud is low, but when you multiply it by the quantity that we're needlessly storing, then we've got a lot of hard questions to ask ourselves there.
And a quick follow-up on that. So, oh, sorry, Marketa, do you want to come in?
Yeah, if I can just quickly add on that, I 100% agree with Hannah that the mindfulness around this is really important. And I think on a personal level, we can just clear up some of the storage on our devices. We take thousands of photos every single day, burst photos even, you know, and there are ways to actually delete that and clear that out every now and then. Also, I think that there's something to be said about our inboxes. They are just full of clutter, full of newsletters and emails that we don't have time to read. So if we don't have time to read and if we are not that interested, just unsubscribe. Try to clear your inbox. And on a business level, I think that there's something to be said about some sort of data retention strategy. This should be considered because lots of organizations, they have duplicates of every single file in multiple places in the cloud. And that is effectively waste. Imagine like if we had to print all of that out, we wouldn't even physically have the space to store it. So the fact that it's online, that doesn't mean that it's away and that it's not tangible. It's just stored in smaller places, but in these massive servers that take so much energy, not only to be powered, but also for to prevent them from overheating. So there's something to be said also about water consumption for AC. You know, it's really quite big. So globally and collectively, we can reduce that impact by just being mindful about how much we actually store and just go back to it periodically and just delete old content.
Really good advice. And there's a question here, Marketa, we'll come back to you on it in a second, but it's around the components of a sustainable digital marketing strategy. So start thinking about that and we'll come back to you in a second. There is a question here. It's really quite a broad, high-level question, and it's from Vijay, and he wants to know, can we actually be sustainable? Is net zero achievable with mass ownership mass ownership of internet-enabled devices such as mobile phones, computers, tablets, etc., or do we need to share devices? And related to this question is 24/7 access to the internet sustainable? So quite a broad question there. But what do people think about that? Who'd like to take that?
I'll jump in. So
Lovely.
in terms of achieving net zero, I think the reality is time will tell. If I'm quite honest, that I sort of see where people have placed 2030 as a target, it feels very close. Whereas just with central government moving things to 2035, I think things may move over. It depends where we're going with things. I do think net zero is achievable, but it will mean we radically have to change the way we live, produce, do our business. It's a complete different ball game here in terms of net zero. You are not going to be able to offset as you wish. That's not how net zero works. You have to make active choices to reduce your emissions. So it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a steep learning curve. But one part of that learning curve is we're all on that same journey. So if you start looking, for example, at the big tech firms, if you look at Apple, for example, recently they launched a little video, a bit of PR called Mother Nature, talking about everything they're doing in terms of products, the services, how they're looking at electricity. And I know it is a bit of PR, but at the same time, it shows it's on the tech, top level tech, and it's also filtering through the supply chain. What worries me is the big tech firm might be able to do certain things. The supply chains may not be able to deliver at the pace that's needed, because at times, supply chains are international. They became pushed around, language barriers in different continents, countries. They're facing different policy decisions in their country. They may not be on the same, for example, European or American view of net zero at the moment. And these are things we sort of have to understand as we're moving forward. So I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think it's going to be possible at some point to reach it.
Lovely, thank you. Marketa, I'm going to come to you. Ned, the next question I'm going to ask you is around the work you're doing around the principles within DEFRA. So, but before I do that, Marketa, a couple of people asking about the main components of the sustainable digital marketing strategy. What would you say are the main components, and what practical advice would you give people? You talked about our inboxes, but you've also got email marketing, social media, all of that sort of stuff. So thoughts on that, please?
Honestly, I think that the one and only principle that we should follow is that we should prioritize quality over quantity. I think that particularly in email marketing, we just sent out thousands, if not millions of emails to our clients. And we kind of pat ourselves on the back like, oh, we've got like 6,000 subscribers or however many. And I think that that doesn't really mean anything. We should really look into the open rates, and we should aim for our clients to be genuinely interested in the content that we create and publish and send them. And if they are not interested, and we have data about this, if we send it, for example, through MailChimp, we know we have data who opened the email in the past, let's say 12 months. If there's a person or a user who hasn't opened the email, any single email in the past 12 months, then perhaps they are no longer interested. So perhaps I would run a separate campaign specifically for them, and just to say, are you still interested in receiving these emails? And if not, I would just remove them. It shouldn't be about numbers and the number of subscribers. It should be about delivering high quality content to people who are genuinely interested and who want our products or services. So that's one thing for email marketing specifically. And when it comes to social media, the same logic really applies. But also, I think that it's becoming so increasingly difficult particularly for SMEs, to actually compete against the noise on social media, that I've seen a trend that more and more smaller companies and organizations, they're actually choosing to be really selective when it comes to their social media networks that they use. So for example, Facebook or Instagram may no longer be that appropriate for whatever they have to say, or X is obviously now really changing everything, and it's no longer very similar to how Twitter used to be. It used to have a certain kind of brand perception, and that is changing quite significantly. So just going back to basics and rethinking if that particular social media channel is still relevant for you and your brand. I think that's also something that should be put on the agenda in organizations.
Lovely. Hopefully that's answered your question. There's some really good practical advice there, and I think we can all hold that mirror up to ourselves, can't we? Ned, do you want to come in there on the back of what Marketa said, and then if you want to lead into the work that you're doing around the standards within DEFRA, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes. Well, yes, I can talk about the standards in DEFRA. Although there's sort of quite a lot of detail, so it's a bit hard to sort of just touch on them without going into loads of waffle, but I'll do my best. I've put in the chat like a link to a slide deck for a talk I'm actually giving this evening about this work. But yeah, slide 32, 33, 34, 35, 36 in that deck, which is a Google Drive link, talks about the principles. But essentially there are 8 principles, and so the idea of these principles is that we have a set of principles for multidisciplinary teams as a whole. So teams that are working towards the design and delivery of services, and we wanted to have one set which covered all the disciplines that might be involved. So the first 4 refer to kind of user-centered design and research roles, but then the others refer to other roles like systems or solution architecture, data architects, software developers, and then we've got an 8th principle which kind of covers the way that teams are set up and the way that they collaborate. So I can try and cover the 8 quickly. Is it just give a really quick summary, Edwina? Is that?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, really quickly.
All right. Really quickly. All right. So yeah, so number 1 is research to understand environmental impacts. And this means really that we need to understand what the impacts are now. So if we're designing a service, then that service is nearly always going to be replacing some kind of sort of as is, so some kind of process for how things are done now. So if we can understand what holistically the environmental impacts are of that, the as is, then we have something to benchmark against. So we can then judge whether our new service will improve things, whether it will bring, kind of net environmental impact benefit. We've then got 3 principles that are about how we design the service. So this is kind of about service design, interaction design, content design. We want to design, number 2, design to help users succeed first time. We want number 3 to design for lower user and agent impacts. And a lot of that is the sort of the offline stuff. So thinking about their use of electricity, of heating, of cooling, if there's any transport involved, whether we're actually encouraging them to buy new tech by creating a new service, which is quite a common thing, I think, in government actually, that we digitize often paper-based systems, and that then means that whole industries in some cases then have to buy tablets and phones and laptops when they weren't using them before. Principle number 4 is about designing for low page, document and communications weight. So that's really some of the stuff that's been talked about already. But so thinking about the size of emails and websites and apps in megabytes, really, and doing everything that we can to reduce the size of those, whilst also ensuring that what we do is still accessible to everyone. Number 5 is for our sort of solution architect colleagues. It's about optimizing processing, transmission and storage. Number 6 is for software developers, really. So it's about developing green applications, software and systems. Number 7, we have Be Smart with Data, which is kind of for data architects, but also for everyone, because we are all, as has been mentioned, or a lot of us anyway, and me included, have a tendency just to chuck everything onto the cloud and just keep it there, and not necessarily be very disciplined in terms of deleting things. And yeah, then so principle number 8 is setting up teams to follow green working practices, as I kind of touched on just now. So that's about thinking about how we collaborate, how often we get together, how much travel is involved, what are the tools that we use to collaborate, and how we can be as green as possible there. So yeah, that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but those are the sort of 8 principles that we're currently thinking of.
Great, and thank you so much for sharing them with us. I think it's really important to think about this as a team, because what we found in our research was sustainability was seen over here. It didn't make its way almost down to digital. And, you know, some of the comments that we had, well, you know, I'm doing my job, it's not my responsibility. Where actually what you're trying to do there is making sure that everybody within that multidisciplinary team, regardless of the role, is thinking about sustainability. So thank you so much for sharing. And what we will do post-event as well is share contact details, if that's okay. So if anybody has any follow-up questions on those principles, Ned, that they're able to follow up with you. Thank you very much. We have a question from James here, and it was really interesting looking at the delegate list here today. We've got a lovely mix of obviously public sector colleagues, but private sector organisations as well. So how do you see the two interacting when it comes to sustainability, and what can, you know, we learn from each other? I suppose this goes back to what people are asking at the start, is who's doing this well? You know, what can we learn from each other? And it's about sharing knowledge and sharing learning, because, you know, we're all looking at the same end goal here. So who'd like to take that in terms of what we can learn from each other?
I'll jump in if that's okay. I think that exactly as you said, you know, it's all about learning from each other. And I think that in private sector, I think that we may be sometimes faster in developing some things or testing things and experimenting. And then the public sector can take those insights and just implement them into policies and practices, best practices, and even principles, just like Ned just introduced. And these are fantastic. So things like that are, I think, really, really important, just taking inspiration from each other. And then, you know, for example, these 8 practices, I will be definitely using them in my presentations, you know, around digital sustainability. These are excellent. And I think it's at the public sector level, I think that oftentimes it's really about simplification, and that sometimes takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, you know, in a private company, because we get so busy with client work and stuff, whereas you guys make it a priority to simplify things so that anyone can use it, and I really value that hugely.
Lovely. And would anybody else like to come in on that as well? Thank you, Marketa. Yeah, Hannah?
I think I've got a few things I might say there. I think the relationship between private and public sector is really interesting in this regard. And I'm coming at this from a data angle. So we are working, or we've been talking to a few public sector organizations who want to measure and manage their emissions, but can't, because the private sector is not willing to share their data transparently. And I think there's a really interesting dynamic there that I hope public sector organizations can apply procurement strategies to force this data to come out. I can see Ash is nodding there. So public sector organizations can push for this data, and then also feed upwards and get some policy, you know, and I mean national legislation in place to force these issues to happen. At EU level, we've got the let me see if I can get this right. CSRD, I think, the Corporate Sustainability Directive reporting legislation that's coming in soon, that is going to force organizations of a certain size to report far more on their CO2 emissions, and they're going to need to figure out what's going on with their tech side as well. So I think there's a really interesting role that public sector can play in kind of pushing private sector. And then to Marketa's point, private sector can tend to respond quite a bit more quickly. So I think if the public sector are pushing for these to happen, private sector can play their role in providing what's needed. And then altogether we move faster. That's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Hannah. And I know Hush wants to come in. Hush, before you do, we obviously have Welsh Government's Procurement Policy Statement Principle 6, which says we will act to prevent climate change by prioritising climate reduction and zero emissions through more responsible and sustainable procurement to deliver our ambition for a net zero sector in Wales by 2030. Interested in your thoughts on the practicalities of that and what we can actually do to support that, linked with what Hannah just said.
I think just touching on what I said before, it's going to be quite a steep learning curve. In terms of suppliers working with them, obviously we've got public sector. Our suppliers sit in the private or third sector. So the interconnection that way, at times through public procurement particularly, the conversation isn't that clear. Whereas private, you may be able to have that discourse with your suppliers. This is what I want, speak to them openly. Public procurement doesn't work like that. If you've gone for a tender exercise, it's like you're writing down your wish list, hoping you understand what you need and they understand what you need, and marrying it together, and it doesn't work perfectly. And there's so much regulation about in terms of what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say, how it's to be an open market. And I think it's the case you need to bring the suppliers closer. Without bringing them closer, it's going to be hard on both ends. Also, when you start using certain languages, we may not intend to, but carbon is filtered with decarbonisation, net zero, carbon neutrality. Say that to an SME and see their response on their face. They may not go for that tender. So it's a case of having conversations in a language that each other understands, and understanding, for example, that SME may not be able to understand that language, but they may understand efficiency, because that's the focus there. They may understand energy, talking a language that means something to them, because at the same time, that SME will be contributing to the local community, most likely. It's making a direct impact to a community that might be left behind. So I think it's one of those things. It's going to be hard, and I would like to see where it goes, but I think it's going to be a very, very steep learning curve on all ends.
Lovely. A lot covered there, isn't there? We've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to circle back around to one of the points that was made at the start, and that was around measurement. It's been lovely to hear people saying this is hard. I think that provides reassurance that, you know, this isn't easy, and, you know, we're going to have to share knowledge and share learning if we're going to make progress towards it. But from a measurement point of view, back to your point at the start, Hannah, you can't manage what you can't measure. When is good enough? What can we measure? How do we do it? What tools are out there? And what is good enough for now? And I think, you know, you probably all have something to say on this. So if we do maybe a bit of a round robin, and then I have one final question. So who'd like to kick us off on measurement and what that might look like?
I'll jump in if that's okay.
Yes, please, Marketa.
So in terms of measuring digital carbon emissions at Wholegrain, we created websitecarbon.com, which is a digital carbon estimator for web pages. So you can type in any URL and it will, well, any publicly facing URL, any accessible URL, and it will give you a results page on the estimation of the carbon footprint of that particular page. So that is almost like an entry level when you try to understand the impact of your digital, well, specifically of your website. And the same logic, because we use the methodology uses the logic that per gigabyte of data, it needs to consume a certain amount of electricity. So that is built into the methodology. So therefore, we can use the same methodology for calculating emissions of email marketing campaigns or anything else, although that is not built in the website carbon estimator. But that is a really good tool that I would recommend. There are plenty others, and it really depends on what you are looking for. If you want something at an entry level and you want something to be shared with your team and to kind of raise awareness about that issue, I would recommend Website Carbon. If you want something slightly more technical, I would recommend, for example, EcoGrader. That is a fantastic tool developed by Mighty Bytes, who we collaborated with on the methodology and building the methodology. And we've got other tools like EcoPing, that can help you check the kind of the trajectory of the progress as you go and improve the website. So those are really great tools that I would recommend.
Lovely. And we can share some links post-event as well, Marketa. Thank you. One more panel member on measurement. Hush, please.
Okay, so taking measurements from the procurement end, where central government introduced any contracts over 5 million, suppliers should be introducing their carbon reduction plans. In terms of that, that would mean they take a baseline of where they are. And if you're working central government or in a big organization, 5 million is quite easy to achieve in terms of buying. So when it comes to that, it's expected that the supplier would declare where they are with a carbon reduction plan and show their route out of here in terms of their products and service and how they run their organization. To be able to do this, you need to also be able to monitor it year on year. There's no point having a plan if no one goes back to it next year to see where they are. And I think that's where category management comes in. Category management, once a contract's been signed, it hands over to a category manager who will look after that contract. And it's important these people, year on year, look at where they are in terms of performance, reintroduce certain things, changes, if people are not meeting plans, see what could be introduced, but work in partnership with people. At times, I think when people say, well, suppliers don't know, people don't disclose information, sorry, it's probably because they don't know. I've worked with many people, we don't know this is different. And I think there's an element of fear factor of hiding or just not giving the information, but not sure how to have that conversation with a big buyer, for example, to say, actually, we don't know our carbon footprint, we don't know how to gather the data, we don't know where to start. And having that conversation is a big starting point to say, okay, let's work together to see what we can do together.
Yeah, lovely. And some tips there in terms of measurement from a practical point of view in terms of websites, but also procurement. But there's a lot more we could discuss around this. So maybe that's something that we prioritise in a follow-up. Ned and Hannah, a final question to you. How can teams influence seniors to focus on sustainability and value it? Ned, you've obviously done a lot of work on this in DEFRA. What advice would you give others to make people see sustainability from a digital point of view kind of here?
Well, I suppose, kind of in terms of getting buy-in, I suppose there's sort of three things that occur to me. If your organization has goals and strategies around net zero or around environmental impacts, which I think most organizations, or probably, or at least they do in the public sector, and many sizable private sector ones do too, then we can make it clear how we're working towards those goals, how sustainability has a role to play in actually, meeting some of those goals and strategies and putting them into action. I think we could probably also highlight the value that that being able to show that you're acting or on that front has more broadly to the organization in terms of kind of brand and for marketing purposes and the benefits that might bring in terms of recruitment. I think that is also it's helpful to do that, and to to be able to kind of tell a story there around help the organization tell a story around the good work that you might be doing. And more generally, I think it's just speaking the language of your organization, speaking the language of business, and understanding that there are many competing priorities. And especially if we look at the sort of delivery, like within digital delivery, there are so many competing priorities on projects. I mean, if we talk about cost, time, privacy, security, accessibility is mandated, so we have to consider that. There's a whole raft of them, and at the moment, sustainability tends to be pushed down right at the bottom. If inclusivity is a nice to have, then sustainability is a even nicer to have, so tends to come right down at the bottom, I would say, partly because we in teams don't really know how to actually action it. But if we can highlight that there are win-wins, if we can highlight that a more sustainable product or service is hopefully also in many cases a more accessible one, it's a more resilient one, it's a cheaper one, then I think maybe we can get some real traction on it.
It's about not seeing it in isolation, but weaving it into everything that we do, isn't it? I definitely think so. Hannah, final word to you before I wrap. This has just absolutely flown by. We could be here all day, Hannah.
We really could, couldn't we? I'll try and say something to add on the points that have already been made here. And I think, Ed, you summarised that really nicely. I think sustainability is a combination, or digital sustainability is a combination of things we already know we should be doing. There's actually very little new here in terms of what we should be focusing on. We know we should be focusing on accessibility. We know we should be focusing on privacy. This is a way of wrapping all of these things together. And what I would say to senior level people is that this is not going to be optional in the future. In the same way that a few years ago we knew we should be doing accessibility. We knew we should have been doing data privacy, and then legislation came along and hit us. Now is the opportunity to get on the front foot and put a competitive advantage in place, because this stuff is going to be mandated and is coming whether you like it or not. You've got a few extra years now to get ahead of the game. So crack on. That's what I would say.
Great closing words. And we obviously have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales. So we're ahead of the game already. But I just want to say thank you so much to our fabulous panel members. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you, Hannah, Hushneara, Ned and Marketa. Really appreciate the time that you put into preparing for this and then for taking questions. We have got quite a lot that we didn't get through, but what we'll be able to do is look at those questions, look at the themes, and then help plan what comes next. As I said, this was a bit of an experiment to see if there was interest in the topic, which there is, but then also what areas are of most interest. So we will definitely look at those unanswered questions. That brings me on nicely to our survey. We would love if you could take a couple of minutes now. We'll finish a couple of minutes early to give you that time to fill in the survey as part of the event. It's a really short survey. We'll pop the link in the chat now. The cutoff time for responses is close of play on Friday, but that will really help us look and see how we can support you to best value post-event. And we'll analyse what we get from those survey findings, and we'll discuss next steps and feedback to you. We do have a number of great speakers in the wings. We could have had 10 on the panel today. Some can run workshops, training, more panel discussions to kind of get people's juices flowing. So yeah, your feedback is going to be really, really important to us. So please do take the time to let us know where you want us to focus. I really want to thank the team behind the scenes at CDPS for all the hard work that has gone into putting this panel event on. Thanks so much for everything that you do behind the scenes. It's invisible, but it does make the event run really, really smoothly. The recording will be on our YouTube channel later, and also the session has been promoted as a pre-record on Wales Climate Week website, and we have a slot there on Friday. So anybody who didn't get a chance to pop along today can either watch it back on our YouTube channel or watch it as live as part of Wales Climate Week on Friday. So please do share links with your colleagues or anybody who you think might be interested. And then a final shameless plug before we go for an event that we have tomorrow. It's part of our series on AI. It has been an extremely popular series and obviously huge links with what we've just talked about. I think Hannah's statistics around ChatGPT blew me away actually in terms of the amount of energy that uses. So we've got one tomorrow around managing bias in AI. Over 200 people signed up. There's still time if you'd like to get involved in that. All of the previous sessions have been recorded and are on our YouTube channel as well. So do pop in and have a look. And it's in partnership with the Alan Turing Institute and with Welsh Government. So all that remains for me to do is to thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd. Thanks for taking the time to attend the session. Thanks for all of your great questions. And thanks in advance for filling in our survey. Mwynhau'ch eich prynawn. Enjoy your afternoon, and we hope to see you at a CDPS event in the near future. Thank you very much.
Diolch.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.